Revenge just once or twice. He wants revenge forever as soon as a player beats him once. And, OK, the game has started. It's the Reti opening. Magnus opening the game with his knight and Jan-Krzysztof Duda pushing a pawn. So very standard stuff. Actually, in later years, this has been my favourite move with white. Just bringing the knight out, staying flexible, not committing the pawns yet. And again, Magnus not committing anything in the centre. Just pushing a pawn, getting ready to fianchetto his bishop onto the long diagonal with white.
Is that what you played in the 2 games that you won against Nils?
It wasn't. Actually, I shouldn't confess this, but in my match against Nils Grandelius, I had no idea what to play. And a friend, I won't name him, suggested I roll a dice to choose my first move. And I rolled that it would be 1d4. So I played 1d4 throughout the entire match. Which took some pressure off the preparation. But, OK, Magnus, he's also a player who can play anything. He can play lots of different types of openings. And here we go, Black's bishop coming out.
Yeah, I like this move very much. I used to play that for Black. But I think White still can get advantage in this variation quite easily.
But Black's super solid, right? Black brings the bishop out before committing the pawns. Maybe Black will put all the pawns on the light squares now that that bishop's out on an active square.
Yeah, definitely. And look, maybe we'll hinge on where the black knight on the right side of the board will develop. Will it step on the F line, or will it perhaps wait and step to the square in front of the king? I actually play this as well with the black pieces, so I love it when the grandmasters follow our openings and we get to learn a little bit. I must admit, I'm always a little bit disappointed when they lose with the openings that I play. But when they win, a part of me thinks, yes, got a lesson there.
Yeah, and very logical play by both sides so far. Magnus there, just distracted for a minute, clearly just trying to get into the groove. He just brought his bishop out, and Black, as expected, is just going to build a wall of pawns on the light squares. And, yeah, it's fascinating. I play this only with the white side, so I'm going to learn from what Magnus does. And you two play it from the black side, so I guess we'll see what Duda does. And either way, the reason I love these positions so much is because the price of each move is actually a lot lower than in some mainstream openings. Normally in, for example, open Sicilians, where it's really direct, you have to attack, otherwise your whole position falls apart. Here, with white, Magnus was thinking for a long time. He could have castled his king, he could push this pawn, he could have pushed other pawns. You're super flexible, and there's less pressure at this early stage. The tension tends to arise later in the middle game. Ivanka?
Yeah, and I was going to say, well, Magnus definitely increasing the stakes as he pushes a pawn to challenge in the centre. And there you saw a nice little triangle from Black, from the light squares. But after pawn takes pawn, this is going to be an interesting moment, because will Jan-Krzysztof Duda actually play bishop takes knight, or will he actually recapture the pawn? And he's gone for the solid choice, and that is to go bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, and now capture with the c-pawn.
Yeah, so we did see a couple of trades. Ivanka briefly mentioned the triangle formation. That's actually a really popular formation for Black. But now, after a trade of knight for bishop, the pawn structure is going to become very symmetrical. So technically, White should have a small advantage because White has the bishop pair. Black has more knights, but White's bishops have the potential to become very strong. But look at the pawn structure. It's very blocked at the moment. And those white bishops, especially that white bishop that has just moved, it's going to be locked in behind its own pawns for a while still. So this position, I've even had it myself, and actually until this last move. But either way, it's just solid start from both sides. Anastasia?
David, I think why actually Black gave up his good bishop, let's say, on d4? It's a question, maybe, which our spectators are asking.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Maybe if we jump into the position, just to show earlier, just if we rewind a few moves, there's a really interesting moment. Black has 2 choices. You can take this way or this way. You actually want to capture towards the centre. This pawn isn't quite in the centre. You want to capture towards the centre, but this would end up in a nasty check and a double attack. So that's why Black parted with his bishop first. He traded off for the knight, and then he's erected this really strong wall of pawns. So if we catch up with the current game position, look at this wall of pawns. They're still here. And these pawns are blunting out White's light-squared bishop. This light-squared bishop struggling to get into the game because it's simply staring at Black's stronghold here. So White now has brought the queen out. Both sides have occupied this potential open line with their rooks. And if Jan-Krzysztof Duda is solid and patient, then he might be able to trade off all the rooks on this line later on, and then the position will kind of slowly steer itself towards a draw. But if Magnus can open things up, for example, later explode open the centre with some pawns, then maybe the bishop pair will become more useful than Black's knights. So it's really tense. It's all about strategy now. It's not about calculation. It's not about any attack. Look how safe both kings are right now. Both kings, I mean, they won't face any danger for the rest of the game, but it's all about small strategic ideas and building up those tiny advantages for later.
Yeah, it's all about fine-tuning those small moments, as David mentions, and definitely an exciting game. And one thing that we do want to stress throughout this Charity Cup is that we do want to get excited about the chess, and so we really still want to see your tweets, your suggestions, your questions, and also your selfies. And remember, you can do that by tweeting us using the hashtag #ChessChamps.
Definitely.
There we go, Jan-Krzysztof Duda. What's he drinking? Is that coffee? Is that Coca-Cola? Or is every different player has a different favourite drink?
Yeah, and he's very thirsty.
But he looks relaxed, huh?
Yeah, he does. Yeah. Well, after you said that, David, about, maybe this puts pressure off him, that he just came into the tournament very late. I'm excited to see how Jan-Krzysztof Duda will do in this tournament. He was knocked out in the preliminaries in the Air Things Masters. And it's going to be interesting to see if he can make it through to the quarterfinals in this one. Here we go.
Yeah, and actually I'm really surprised by the pace that both players have started playing so early in the game. Neither player spending that much time so far, both still with over 14 minutes. And still, there's some big decisions being made. Magnus there retreating with his knight. He's just opening up the line for his rook, maybe trying to maneuver that knight to a more promising circuit later on. Still, yeah, I mean, I personally prefer White's position, but I'm just surprised that neither player's slowed down to really form a long-term plan.
Somehow I started to look for some jumps of this knight from C file, maybe like 95, 94, but at the moment the queen is not defended, right, on D7. So, but it's something in the air.
Yeah, no, these are the small moments that we were talking about, those small little things. Black would love to move the knight, but can't do that. Yeah. And the white knight, on the other hand, can go on a jumping circuit.
Yeah, and Anastasia mentioned this black queen is not defended. For example, you wanted to jump out the way, hit the white queen, maybe also hit some pieces. This was actually possible because now the white queen is undefended. There's tension between the queens, and after queen takes queen, black could have stepped back and recaptured. This would just be a queen trade. So I think Jan-Krzysztof Duda, he's set up now an idea that you mentioned. He has defended that black queen, and he doesn't want to defend it with the knight. The knight wants to do maybe some damage in White's position, so he's just stepped his rook forward, a dual-purpose move. Firstly, always double up your rooks if you can. The two rooks are going to team up on this open file. And secondly, he's defended his queen. So now if White is really careless, for example, and pushes this pawn forward, gets aggressive, trying to push forward to destabilize the black knight, there would be tricks such as knight takes pawn, jumping out of the way, and this is your idea, Anastasia, hitting the white queen, but also now after the white queen takes the black queen, you don't need to recapture, you can flick in a check, winning a piece first, and then next move, recapturing the white queen. So Magnus, of course, is not going to fall for that trap, but a really sneaky idea there from Duda. And meanwhile, a couple of moves, Magnus bring his king up, so now no more checks from the black knight, defending his loose bishop on this square, and black now jumping forward, and the white knight continuing to jump as well. So both sides have their ideas. I really like this black knight on this square. It can jump in at some point to White's half of the board. White's knight wants to do the same though. It wants to dance back and then forward to attack the black queen. It's just a maneuvering battle, but there's always hidden tactical tricks in the position, and that was one of them.
And it really seems like center is in play in this game. So many of the pieces just, cramped up in the center there.
Do you think the black queen feels claustrophobic, just all of its pieces around? But yeah, this is just good strategy, right? Just centralize your pieces if in doubt, and not too much can go wrong if everything protects each other as well. It's just really instructive how White's king stepped up to defend the white light-squared bishop, stopping any potential checks. Then the black rook also stepped up, defending the black queen. Everything's protected, and still, I think that's why the evaluation bar says 0.1, 0.0. It's just dead level. Both sides just playing very sensible chess.
Yes, they play very well, and Magnus also, with move king g2, moving his king forward, managed to show us one prophylactical move, right? King g2 is...
What is that? Prophylactical move? I hear that sometimes. What is that?
Yes, a prophylactic move, it's such a move which actually stops all ideas of your opponent. And it's actually a very annoying thing, because you would like to do something, but you cannot, because your opponent understood what are you going to play, and he decided to protect against that. So you don't like this kind of moves from your opponent because it ruins your plan.
Yeah.
You have to think of something else sometimes. Okay, but this one was a very typical, quite easy one move.
Prophylactical move.
Yes, prophylactical move.
It's instructive for everyone, because when we're young, young, we're just focused purely on our own plans. It's all about checkmating the king. We don't care what our opponent wants to do. But yeah, as we get older, we realise, OK, this is our opponent's plan. We'll stop it 3 moves in advance, frustrate the opponent, and only then pursue our own plans. And as Anastasia says, it's super frustrating when you come up with this really genius idea and your opponent stops it before it's even close to being on the board.
It's even been said that some of the top players are so good, they will stop your plan before you've even thought about it.
There's some famous world champions like Petrosian, who was famous for doing this. And yeah, it's just impossible to have fun against these players because they stop you having fun before the fun becomes an idea. And
talk about fun.
Yeah, look at this move. Aggression now from Jan-Krzysztof Duda, pushing a pawn, hitting the white queen. And Ivanka, I'm trying to work this out. Is that a sacrifice? Can white just grab that pawn? It's undefended. And a big question now for Magnus Carlsen. If he has to run away with the white queen, then Duda's move has been justified. But if he can take this pawn safely...
Yeah, the proof is in the pudding, right? We have to bring up the board and check out why white can't just capture that pawn. And queen takes pawn.
Queen takes pawn, it looks like a free pawn. I guess the idea is that black's rook wants to slide across to hit the white queen. And now when the white queen sidesteps, I'm guessing she returns back where she came from, or a similar square, then now black can capture this pawn. And because he's opened up a line for his rook, this knight is now defended. So this would just result in a series of trades, for example, capture here and a capture here, and level number of pawns again. I'm still not sure who to favour, to be honest. I quite like this black rook eyeing up the white king indirectly. But then again, it does feel a bit loose for black. This knight has some pressure on it from the white rook, from the white queen. Either way, if we backtrack in the current position, this pawn push, pushing the b-pawn forward, hitting the white queen from Duda, the fact that he played it so quickly and so confidently means that he's calculated this out. And he's pretty confident that if, as mentioned, queen takes pawn, the rook can just slide across and black is doing OK. That being said, the evaluation bar does not like what Duda has done. So Magnus, he is trying to make him prove it. He has captured this pawn. This is the current position. The white queen under attack from the black rook. The queen stepping back. And now, will Duda recapture this pawn, or does he have something even more sneaky up his sleeve? I think he just has to take this pawn.
I think so too.
Yeah, he has to hope that his position just holds together for the next few moves. The evaluation bar, meanwhile, correcting itself, maybe seeing that black's idea is just about OK. Risky, but it's OK.
And we like risky.
Yeah, we like risk.
We do like risk, but on the other hand, I wasn't, like David, I wasn't entirely convinced by the resulting position. And this is often something that we say when you finish your calculations. Take a deep breath, stop, and evaluate evaluate the position that you have. And you know, you've kind of been there, you've seen everything up close. Now you need to sit there, take a step backwards, and just see whether the action is good for you. Because over here, I'm not entirely sure, because Magnus has retreated his knight in order to attack the rook. But look at the knight. The knight can actually jump to a dark square. It has a nice post there. The light square bishop that is sitting next to the king on the right doesn't quite look like it's doing anything, looking at a wall. But if we think ahead, it can mobilize itself and do some crafty maneuverings, and it will be start looking at the knight on the light squares on c6 square. I don't know. I'm thinking that white still has what we call in chess a nibble.
A tiny little advantage.
Nibble?
Yeah. A little thing to bite on. Yeah.
It's the type of advantage that it's not big, so we don't really want to talk about it, but we have to give it a name. So a nibble.
A nibble. I like it.
Yeah, you chew away at your opponent's position until something cracks.
All right.
And yeah, right now it's the type of advantage that is temporary, because if Magnus can jump in with his knight, if at the moment he's attacking the black rook, if he can do something over the next 3 or 4 moves, he will have an advantage. But if Duda defends well, it could just fizzle out. Pieces could be traded, and it's also opposite colour bishops. So if the queens and rooks disappear, the knights disappear, it's just going to be a draw. So Duda has to be accurate, but it's within the realms of a defendable position right now. Anastasia, who do you prefer?
Yeah, I think white is doing well, but actually at the beginning I thought it's so nice to have the rook on the second row. This is what we used to know, that if you manage to bring your rook to the second row, to the 7th rank, it's good for you. But unfortunately for this rook, I don't think it's that black should really keep it there, yes, on the 2nd rank, because you can even maybe lose this rook. I mean, it looks scary. For example, if you try to attack this knight, right, with putting the rook on d2, then I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe this rook will not manage to get out.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Probably
It
Duda
can simply get stuck, basically.
Yes, it can get trapped. You know, there.
Look how lonely this rook feels. I mean,
Yes.
all of Black's army are the other half of the board so far away, and this rook, as you mentioned, might get trapped. The queen will just step back and maybe step across
Yes.
and try and win it. So, okay, the rook was not brave enough to stay on this ideal second rank. It has indeed stepped back where it came from. And Magnus has one move to try and cause some damage. Jovanka, you mentioned trying to get this bishop back. I like that idea as well. Ideally, you want to kind of step it back and then jump over your own knight and start pinning the enemy pieces. But at the moment, it's hard to get this piece into the action. We could see a scenario maybe where white tries to get this rook, which is doing nothing in the corner, into the game. But if you slide it across, it just gets traded off for black's rook. Maybe you could try and step up your rook at some point, up to this square or this square, and then double up. But yeah, it's small nibbles here. It's not a huge advantage. And Magnus, if he can get one of these two pieces into the game, he'll be very happy. But Duda is rock solid, everything defended, everything protecting each other right now.
Yeah, definitely. It's very small, isn't it? It's very small things, and it could, like you say, could equally fizzle out. If Magnus were feeling super enterprising while we still have the board up, I mean, but it takes incredible risk, you can actually push the pawn forward.
In the centre.
Yeah, and bulldoze open that line. However, it is incredibly risky, and you have to have a real good feel for the dynamics to even think about making a move like that, because you can't undo pawn moves, and it will create a big weakness.
Yeah, and for example, after a pawn trade in the centre there, white has an isolated pawn and could definitely backfire. So, yeah, if we look at the pawn structure right now, it's almost completely symmetrical. That's why we would be thinking of moves such as breaking forward in the centre, trying to create some action. Symmetrical pawn structures very rarely give either side a big advantage.
Well, Magnus Carlsen is definitely thinking about the next move. Will he take that risk? We do have the first result in the Charity Cup. Erik Hansen and Hans Niemann have played a draw in their first game. So a long break for them before game 2. We also see Richard report the bar all the way over to his side against Zhu Wenjun. And looking good also for Liam Le against Lai Ting-ji.
Yeah, and actually, that's a really interesting battle. Hans against Hansen. Hansen against Niemann there. And I just took a look over at that game. And actually, last week in my match against Niels Grandelius, I was doing some opening preparation. I had studied the exact position that they finished on in that game. So a battle in the Italian game. It was a battle of kind of memory work. And clearly, both sides had studied it very deeply. So a draw, a fair result.
Interesting. And, well, everyone, look at David. He's wearing his beautiful chest tie. And this tie is now being put up for auction as a fundraiser for UNICEF. And you can make a bid for that fantastic chest tie. So kind of you, David, to put it up for auction. And it's on CCT auction.com. And this auction will finish today. So you only have a few hours to put in your bid. And if you go into that site, you can also see a bunch of other stuff that is put up for auction for the Charity Cup. Some very cool pieces on there.
And I think I've actually worn this tie for most of the final days throughout last season's Champions Chess Tour. So, yeah, it's going to be emotional. But either way, yeah, I hope it does go to a good home.
Yes.
And obviously for a good cause, so please donate.
Yes.
Is it a lucky tie, David?
Oh, good question, Jovanka. So, actually, I was telling Kaya just before the show, I used to be famous for wearing a checkered wristband on my wrist, I think, for more than 10 years, 10, 15 years.
Wow.
Every tournament, every chess game I played, I had to wear a checkered wristband. And a group of kids would follow me around. They would call them howlers, and they would wear the wristband as well. But then one tournament, I just forgot to bring it. I didn't pack it. And then I decided, OK, I needed something else that's checkered. And while I was abroad, I went to a shop and I found this tie. So it was just a replacement as kind of a secondary lucky charm. And I can't complain. It brought me some luck. It brought me here to Oslo.
Exactly.
And OK, meanwhile, a move by Magnus Carlsen. He has jumped in with his knight. And I think one of you mentioned this, right? So attacking the black queen, but this knight can get traded off for the black bishop. And there we go. The knight eliminated. It was just too strong on that outpost. Had to be traded, and now Magnus recapturing with his rook. He's created a path for that rook in the corner to get into the game. So we might well see Magnus try and stack up his rooks. And still some pressure. I'm not sure I like the white bishop here compared to the black knight, but there are some immediate threats.
I thought about this bishop and knight competition here. Who is better, who is worse?
Which do you normally prefer, Anastasia?
I don't know. I mean, I look at this bishop, I don't like it. But if it starts moving, Yes, but still the pieces of white are quite active, right? At this moment, this rook, I mean, he can also take the c-file, so...
Yeah, and there are pawns on both sides of the board, so bishops do have some potential. Meanwhile, there were a couple of moves. Black's knight ran out of the way from some potential attacks, and the queens got traded. So we're in the endgame now, and Magnus doing Magnus things. Every game I see him play, he pushes his a-pawn forward 2 squares. And this is actually, again, something that Nils Grandelius did against me. Every game we played, when he had white, his pawn flew up the board. It must be from his work with Magnus. And yeah, this a-pawn push doesn't really do too much, but it just looks like it's slowly inching towards its promotion square. And the rook's back to where you wanted it, Anastasia, the 2nd rank. Yeah, it's an interesting play. Both rooks getting active. And, OK, pawn structure still symmetrical. It's going to be hard for Magnus to try and create something tangible. But then again, it's possible. There's still enough material left and enough imbalance now with the bishop versus knight to try and create winning chances.
Now h4.
h4, yeah.
From
When in
both
doubt, push
sides.
those pawns.
Simon's favourite move. It can never be a bad move, he says. And it's a good life philosophy.
Yeah.
90%
And it must be nice. I mean, so many times when I'm playing chess, I'm just, what should I do? And the clock's ticking, and I just have no idea. It must be so nice to always have that move to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but most of the time, I understand, you know.
Most of the time, yeah, I have to say that. I mean, it's a good luxury move.
Yeah.
Or if you're feeling really, really aggressive and your opponent has put his pawns in one particular way, then you can feel entitled to push that h-pawn. And here, it's a nice move just to kind of say, hey, I'm potentially going to expand on the right side of the board, push up the fellow g-pawn, maybe even an f-pawn once the king steps out of the rook's eye line. In the meantime, Black needs to think also about just activating the knight and activating the king, because he would love to move the knight and move it to the f5 square. Unfortunately, there is something called a back rank mate in the air, and that knight is tied down to the defense of the bottom row.
Yeah, if the knight moves, then, as Jovanka mentioned, the rook will come up, and this king is trapped. No way out. That would end in checkmate, so that's why Black gives his king some breathing space, and now there's a safe square. So we call this Luft, which just means air, giving the king a square. And Magnus, wow, OK, Magnus pushing forward, and Jan-Krzysztof Duda, I'm shocked by this. He's pushed his pawn forward. Again, another pawn sacrifice. We saw it earlier in the middle game with another pawn on the other side of the board. Now he's given up a pawn here, but his whole idea is that after the pawn recaptures, I think he's just going to jump forward with the black knight. And now he's actually eyeing up 2 pawns. So white's a pawn up temporarily, but black is trying to hit this pawn with a check, but also hitting this pawn with a check, because this pawn in the center is not actually guarded by its fellow here, which is pinned along the 2nd rank. So, for example, after pawn takes pawn, Jan-Krzysztof has a choice, but he could just play knight takes pawn with a check, and after the king moves, he could drop back and recapture. And he's just trying to eliminate everything on this right side of the board. Magnus says, I believe you, I'm not having any of that. And, OK, he has just ignored this, bringing his rook across instead. So Duda successfully being able to trade a set of pawns.
Yeah, what a nice move, h5, actually.
Really
yes,
nice move.
I mean, really cool.
Fighting for space as well. This, to be honest, would not have been on my radar. That's why someone like Duda is so special, so talented, and one of the best players in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm impressed by that move, but I also would like to add a little word of caution here, because, you know, it's sometimes recklessly pushing pawns forward in endgames. I mean, you really do have to consider whether they will be a weakness in the long term or an asset, because, say, for instance, white is allowed to capture the pawns, then maybe that pawn is a weakness. And this is why you see Duda exchange pawns. And, well, the big question is whether white's pawn on h4 will become a strength, or will it become a weakness?
Yeah, Magnus might well try and push it forward just to trade it off at some point, because it is isolated. And I know we joke about Harry, and often Harry ends up winning games by kind of using itself as a battering ram or pushing through in the endgame. But here it is isolated, and it's unlikely to be able to push further without getting traded. To be honest, I don't see any danger for Duda. For example, if he just waits, maybe there are more productive moves. But even if he just brings his king up 1 square to a dart square away from any checks, for example, Magnus, he might try and infiltrate on the 7th rank, trying to break through. This is where rooks love to be. As Anastasia mentioned, the 2nd rank for black rooks, the counterpart is the 7th for white. So, but after not trading, because this would allow an attack and a double attack, after black's rook instead maybe just drops back, covers the 7th rank, we would just see a trade of one set of rooks. White's rook has to decide, has to capture one of the black rooks. And for example, now black just maintains full control. Black just doesn't have any weaknesses. That's Magnus's problem. This rook now defends everything, defends this side of the board. The king defends all of these pawns. They defend each other. And yeah, there we go. The king has moved. No real worries for Duda.
Actually, it's a perfect position you described when everybody defends each other. Yes, like chess pieces, they're like a team, and if they defend each other, you cannot miss something, you cannot lose a hanging piece. So it's a good idea to protect your pieces by using all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so exactly, no weaknesses.
No weaknesses. So, for example, yeah, if the rook comes up, just defend everything, bring your rook back, and things will get traded off. And this is the type of chess I play these days. Old man chess. Defend everything and just wait for your opportunity. Wait for your opponent to get impatient. And Magnus, OK, he doesn't want to see the rooks leave the board. He wants to keep as many pieces on for later. So he pushes forward. And when in doubt, push pawns on the flanks. That was what we've learnt so far.
But you know, I have a feeling that Magnus has a very sneaky plan, and it's to do with pushing Alice, how can I forget the name? Alice, the A-pawn, all the way to the 6th square, and David highlighting it, and then, and only then, to move forward with the rook to the 7th row. OK, he's done it in one go. He's moved the rook to the 7th row, 7th heaven.
7th heaven. I guess, Jovanka, unfortunately, this pawn, I mean, it would love to step forward with this idea of marching forward with the rook, but
I like the idea, actually.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right now, it's not possible because the rook would just gobble up this pawn. There's actually no way of defending this pawn anymore safely for white. You'd love to retreat your bishop, for example, bring it back to defend this pawn. But remember, this rook has its eyes on two sides of the board, and this bishop would be undefended. So, OK, Magnus instantly bringing his rook up to challenge the black rook.
Yeah, but still, black has got some questions to answer, and it's all going to be along the 7th row, because if you do sit tight and try to hold that 7th row, then your rook might be out of squares, and the light square bishop can show her long-range possibility, and David's probably going to highlight the diagonal she wants to go to.
This one.
Yes.
And over to this side later. But meanwhile, OK, Duda has just traded a set of rooks, and this is really clever. He's brought his rook across. I think we're going to see a result soon, because he's hitting this pawn, and if white goes and grabs this black pawn, the knight is just going to come to the side, attacking the rook, attacking this pawn, and when the rook moves, we would just see everything getting traded off. The whole left side of the board has disappeared, all of the pawns getting traded, and once that happens, if play is only on one side of the board, it's bound to be a draw. Just no imbalances, really.
Yeah, actually, pay attention. It was another prophylactical move by Duda in this game. When he moved his king towards the center, he actually defended against the idea bishop take the pawn. So maybe, let's say it's another prophylactical move in this game.
Yeah, for example, if, as expected, rook takes pawn happens, the knight moves, say the rook moves, after knight takes pawn, if the king was back on the 7th rank, due to this pin, white could win a pawn. But really clever play from Duda there. He's just eliminating everything. And look at Magnus's body language. Let's go back to the players, because he is not happy. He knows he's been neutralized. Duda, very calm, very relaxed, defending this game really well. White's remaining pawn, Alice, is just about to drop off, and it's going to end in a draw.
Yeah. And I guess Jan-Krzysztof Duda will be happy with that result against world champion Magnus Carlsen. Remember, it could be these two that we see in the next world championship match. Jan-Krzysztof Duda is ready to play in the candidates. And, well, Anastasia, you've been a commentator, you've been leading the press conferences at so many world championship matches. How many has it been?
I'm trying to remember, because I've been also to women's world championships too. So I think 3 world championships and probably like 2 or 3 for women. Really lost the track. And yeah, I mean, we could see Duda next time. I mean, it's really possible. I mean, he's one of the participants in the candidates tournament. And also, Kaya, we were together in Sochi. I mean, for the world championship when Magnus played against Visha Anand. I remember you were playing chess too at that time. So how do you feel?
I was learning. Yes. I haven't gotten much better either. But I am learning sitting in the studio here.
This is what I wanted to ask you. How is it going? I mean, we have to check today.
I can promise you, most of our viewers would still beat me if playing online against me. I'm just not very patient, but I am trying to learn. And I'm getting very good at capturing center in the start of the games, at least. Yeah.
That's a good start.
Yeah, it's a good start. All right, we have another move, but still heading towards that draw, I suppose, David.
Yeah, Magnus still trying to set some small problems for Duda to solve. We saw that white pawn did indeed disappear, but after the black knight went to capture it, white's rook has gone back to where it came from, and this is what we call a pin. That black knight cannot move out the way because then the black rook would drop behind it. So Magnus just causing some discomfort. Duda at some point will maybe move his rook to a square. It can be protected by the black knight later. For example, if the black rook steps up the board at this point or in the next few moves, one square, and then the black knight can move and just defend its own rook. So you can break the pin. It's not a type of eternal pin that we sometimes see in games that do decide results. Duda here, yeah, he just needs to find the right square for the black rook. There's not that much choice either. The black king can't move, the black knight can't move, so you have to move the black rook.
Yes,
you can move any pawns either. Yeah, nice move.
He found the way how to get out from the spin.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. There is still one tiny problem left on the board, but I don't think it's a very difficult challenge. You know, there's Harry still left, and it can advance forward and push itself. And after all, if that bishop and the rook manage to coordinate together to attack those, okay, it's on the board.
One final trap, yep. If pawn takes pawn, this pawn looks a bit scary, only 3 squares away from promotion. If pawn takes pawn, then the bishop recaptures, and I'm still not sure it's going to decide the game, but at least white will win a pawn on the next move. This pawn is attacked by the rook and by the bishop. So I'm expecting Duda here to just play it safe and bring his knight out of the pin. And the reason he put his rook on this square is because the knight now defends this rook. And white, unfortunately, doesn't have time to push this pawn through because his rook is under fire. And Duda does indeed play this. If the rooks come off, for example, rook takes rook, this is just a dead draw. White's pawn, OK, the rooks have come off. White's pawn is not going to break through and become a queen because even if it does push forward, for example, the knight retreats and pushes forward again, the black king can just step back and easily stop this pawn. I think Magnus here, he's going to accept the fact it's just a draw and he's going to play pawn takes pawn. And look at the structure here. Complete symmetry. 3 pawns here for white and 3 pawns here for black. It's just a draw. Bishop and knight here, they're just completely balanced.
All right, so this will probably be a draw, but Richard Report has gotten a great start to his Champions Chess Tour career, his very first tournament in the tour. It's a win for him against Ju Wenjun and 3 points for Richard Report. And I always wondered, Anastasia, during these World Championship matches, when you're running these press conferences, how hard is it when a player, and maybe especially Magnus, has lost the game?
Okay, it's always hard. I mean, especially when somebody loses the game, somebody wins. I mean, the mood is not so great of the one who just lost the game. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be, you know, first of all, a person who understands. First of all, I'm a chess player myself, so I can understand what players feel at this moment, and I'm not pushing them too much. You know, if I have chance to speak with them, if they don't run away from the press conference. So I'm trying to be nice. But of course, I mean, it's everybody understands what's happening at this moment. And yeah, I mean, I remember those situations with Vishy Anand in Chennai. It was really hard to handle the press conference, and to, you know, also it was very hard for the players as well. I mean, there were sometimes very tricky questions from other journalists, and so on. You can imagine. I mean, David, your uncle also. I mean, all of us, we know what does it feel to lose a game. I don't know if somebody would come at this moment and ask me a question, I don't know what I would answer.
Exactly.
Actually.
Very angry. Well, I've been there myself. Magnus Carlsen once, he just logged off the interview after losing a game here in the Champions Chess Tour as well. It can be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I think we got 11 words out of him before.
You counted.
My opponent played very well. Goodbye.
Yeah, my opponent played very good. Goodbye. Yeah, that's what he said. So it can be hard, but it is something about chess. Losing in chess.
Yeah, it also depends how do you lose. Also, you know, it's like, it's all about it. Yes, if it was a really nice game, let's say at the end something, let's say, happened after a long fight, it's one story. If you blundered something, it's another story. So it's like, it's so tricky. Always you try to find the right words, but it's hard to find the right words for someone who really lost right now. So, I mean, okay, it's just part of our job, I guess, to handle the situation and try not to make suffering even more, as much as we can.
Yeah, I saw a really interesting interview with Grishuk and his opponent, who I can't quite remember who it was, and he was asked how long does it take for him to recover from a loss, and his answer was 1 hour. which really
was clear.
it was very time specific. But I think 1 hour is about right, at least.
How much time it takes for you, David, to recover?
Until my next game, I think. Yeah, I'm a bad loser, I got to admit. I actually played mini golf yesterday, and oh my God, I was furious. I came last. So. Okay, meanwhile, a trade of pawns, and you can see on both players' body language, neither of them has big winning chances here. The white bishop stepped back. I'm slightly surprised the black knight didn't try and re-centralize itself, maybe jump in and back. And
hang on a second, the knight.
The knight now is actually trapped in a way. It can jump back at the right moment, protected by a pawn. But what do we call this, Ivanka? Simon Williams had a name for this, the knight stable.
The knight stable, that's right.
Just keeping that black knight in its stable, not allowed to jump back out. And this is a really common pattern when a bishop or a pawn is kind of there's two squares in between, and there's a knight. The knight is often dominated, but here I don't think it's enough. Maybe you could bring the black knight back right now. And there we go. I think a trade here, white capturing that black knight, might even backfire on white if he's not careful. Black would then just get a passed pawn and use that as a distraction. So well calculated by Duda, and the black knight now can jump back to safety, and no more domination of the black knight. It's just going to be a draw. It's a matter of time.
Can you remind me, please, the rules? I mean, can you offer a draw during the game, or you have to do the repetition, or what is the rule?
Yeah, the players can't offer a draw. I think it's before move 30, and very rarely do we see a draw offer, actually. Normally the players play it out, or a drawn position like this, often they'll find a way to repeat moves, and or just exchange everything off the board. And here we go.
Yeah.
Bishop against king. Black even sacrificed the knight, but a bishop alone cannot deliver checkmate. It's a draw.
It's a draw.
All right.